Order, order. Can I welcome members and witnesses to our public evidence session of the Education Select Committee this morning. This is the second evidence session in our inquiry on further education and skills. Before I ask witnesses to introduce yourselves to us this morning, can I say it's relatively unusual. You're all very, very welcome this morning. It's relatively unusual to have 4 witnesses from the same organisation. And I wanted to ask that you might just help us with our timing this morning by choosing between you which of you is most appropriate to answer each question on behalf of the whole organisation, rather than following our usual practice of allowing any witness to come in on the questions. That will help us with getting through the session this morning in time for Prime Minister's questions at 12 o'clock. Can I ask you now to introduce yourselves to the committee, starting with Mr. Smith?
Okay, good morning, and nice to see everyone here. My name is Phil Smith. I'm chair of Skills England in this particular context, and background in the technology industry. So.
Thank you.
Good morning, my name is David Bell. I'm the Vice Chair of Skills England, and in my day job I'm the Vice Chancellor of the University of Sunderland.
Morning everyone, my name is Tessa Griffiths. I am the co-CEO of Skills England.
Morning everyone, my name is Sarah Maclean. I'm the other part of the job share and co-chair, co-CEO of Skills England. Morning.
Thank you very much. So Skills England was established in July 2024 in a shadow form within the Department for Education. Can I ask first of all what your timeline is to be fully operational as the body that you will eventually become once the current legislation has completed its passage through Parliament?
Well, let me start just by saying, first of all, thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk here, because I think as a forming organisation, it's really important we get a chance to talk to members of Parliament, and particularly to this committee. So welcome that opportunity. I mean, obviously, as was stated, I think originally, the intention was to set up Skills England within 12 months of the announcement. And, the organisation has been running in shadow form up till now. And in fact, the approach we are taking generally is to assume that we're up and running. And everybody I talk to, including some of your witnesses later on who I've talked to, my assumption has been we're trying to do everything we can to address this agenda. But I can maybe pass over to Tessa or Sarah to just talk us through a little bit about where we are in terms of timing.
Yeah, so as you know, the IFATE bill is currently making its way through Parliament. Once that bill gets royal assent, that will enable us to transfer those functions and people from IFATE, the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, into Skills England. We hope, obviously we're subject to parliamentary timescales, but we hope that will be concluded swiftly. And at that point, our work really begins in earnest.
Thank you. And so can I ask Mr. Smith and Sir David, you've been in post since February of this year. What's been the focus of your work in your time so far?
Well, I've tried as much as possible, both internally and externally, given it's not a full-time role, although it does feel a little bit like a full-time role, that to get out both internally and externally to talk to people. So obviously you've got an organisation which is transforming, so they want confidence that they're going to be in an organisation which is going to contribute and be successful, and I've spent time talking to them. But I've also been out talking to as many people as I can, dinners, public speaking, assemblies and so on, really to listen as much as I can to what people are actually saying. And in that role, I'm hearing a huge amount of enthusiasm for Skills England as an organisation to be addressing this broad challenge that we have in the skills system. And so I've spent a lot of time doing that. And of course, trying to get my head around, as much as I need to get my head around, all the detail of what's actually going on inside and outside, because you'll not be surprised to know it's a complex system, and that one of the opportunities we have in Skills England is to address that complexity and to simplify it for the learner and also for the teacher and or the small business owner or whoever else needs to engage with it. So.
Thank you.
My workload has not been as great as Phil's. I probably had 2 areas of focus initially. First of all, just understanding more about how the skills environment is going to work at a regional basis, as obviously I'm based in the northeast of England. So that's been important. And then secondly, I've met one or two other organisations in further and higher education who obviously have got a lot to contribute at this stage. But I imagine that once the board is fully up and running and the organisation is full steam ahead, we'll get into a much more systematic pattern of meetings around the country.
Thank you. And can I just ask, as a follow-up to that, what's the vision for Skills England?
Well, let me take that first of all, and if need be, we can have others contribute. But Skills England, I think it was widely stated, including by the Prime Minister when he announced Skills England, that the skills system has challenges. There's no doubt about it. It's hard to navigate. It's got a lot of historic complexity. It's got inaccessibility for certain parts of the community who maybe find it just too difficult. Small business owners are a classic example of that, as well as younger people. But I think, with a changing environment where we've got 1.4 million new jobs by 2035 coming into the workforce, and we have, as was stated in the first Skills England report, 71% of the current workforce will still be in the workforce in 2035. So that means this is not a job of just waiting for people to appear. This is for saying, how do we get the workforce of today skilled for the world of 2035? And with global tensions, challenges, security and other things, as well as technological disruption, there's a great opportunity there for us to take a world-leading position in building the best skills system we possibly can. So we see that as a real opportunity, but to be data-led, to take and advise government on the best approaches to take regionally, nationally, and using international and even international in the UK sense expertise to inform what we do. And doing that as much as we can with true data, which we have the opportunity to do, and to form policies which are relevant for everybody. So really, I think it's a fantastic opportunity. We're really, really keen to the Skills England, and I know everyone here is, enthused by the success. And as I've talked to the staff and to individuals out in the general community, people are excited about the opportunity for Skills England, as we are.
Thank you. Skills England will operate as an executive agency within the Department for Education, and that means that it will have less operational independence than the predecessor organisation. What risks does that pose to the independence of Skills England as an organisation, and how are you planning to address those risks?
Well, I'll start, and I'll ask maybe David to comment on a little as well. But I think what we're trying as much as possible to do is not to focus on, barriers and obstacles, but to focus on opportunity. Now, I'm not saying there aren't barriers and obstacles, because clearly there are in any role that you have. But, the fact that we set ourselves up as an executive agency, which means we have independence, but we have a tie-in to the department, is powerful. But our perception is that, there are huge numbers of challenges that need to be solved, some of them which I've mentioned before, and that we are taking that as an opportunity to get across all of government, but to get out to industry and work with industry strong. And obviously my background, and David's, I'm sure, through the university, with strong industry engagement is really important. And I think we recognise those are not givens, but something we have to really work through. But I don't know, David, you might want to say a little bit more about the model.
Yeah, in a previous life, I was a permanent secretary at the Department for Education, so had the opportunity to work with various bodies differently constructed. And my sense was that more important was the impact and influence that bodies had, almost irrespective of their, quotes, constitutional status. And I think the executive agency model works very effectively because you've got the impact of being slightly removed from the main policy department to focus on delivery of certain activities, but you're also closer enough to have that influence with ministers. And I think if you look across government, there are a whole bunch of executive agencies, the Met Office, the Health Security Agency, the Forestry Commission and the like, that really do have a strong role to play. And I don't think people get terribly consumed about their constitutional status. So it'll be for Skills England to be able to demonstrate that impact and influence as it really gets up and running.
In a sector that needs not only kind of transformational reform in the short term, but stability and strong leadership for the long term as well. Does it not give you any concern at all that the Secretary of State or future Secretary of State, and we've had many of those under the previous government, could decide to close Skills England without recourse to Parliament or to legislation?
Well, perhaps if I start on that, I mean, of course, you can't predict the future of various bodies, but I think if Skills England delivers on that kind of mission that Phil's talked about, it has that impact and starts to really change with its partners, the skills systems in this country, I think it's less likely to be a risk about the future. But it's all about the delivery of the Skills England mission that I think all of us on the table here today are very aware that we need to now start delivering on the basis of the way in which we're constructed.
Thank you. Caroline.
Thank you. My question is for Sarah and Tessa. And can I just say how great it is to see two women job sharing a chief executive role. I'm very pleased to see that. So as joint chief executives of Skills England, you will both have a crucial role in delivering the agency's mission to drive growth and bring key stakeholders together, including other government agencies. Now, there have been questions about this in the sector, so I'd just like to know whether you think that the chief executives have been given the right level of seniority to carry out these duties and to have a meaningful impact across government.
So thank you very much for the kind words about being a job share in a senior position. We're very proud to have got this role, and also delighted to promote job sharing and flexible working. I think it's really important that we can role model that. So very excited to do that in this role. We've job shared together for over 17 years, so quite an interesting example. Obviously, that's not the subject of today, but outside this, we'd be very happy to talk to you about that and our experiences. So I know during the passage of the bill, there were some questions, and people have had questions about the seniority of the CEO role. I think along the themes that David and Phil have been saying, it's about impact. It's about influence. The level of the CEO role is actually the same as in other executive agencies. It's the same as the CEO of iFate, for example. So we don't see that as an issue. But I guess the proof will be in what we manage to deliver and how well we do that.
And I guess I would just add that Sarah and I have been working on these issues and in this sector for a number of years, and we're just incredibly proud and excited to be leading this organisation. It's a huge privilege, and we just can't really wait to get started. So yeah, as Sarah said, hopefully you'll hold us to account and judge us by what we're able to deliver.
Okay, and will you be encouraging the government to review the seniority of this position at any point, periodically?
I'm just going to make some joke about promotion, but that doesn't feel right either. There's a review is already built in for the whole of the organisation within a reasonable time frame, so we can look at that and see whether that needs to be reconsidered. But I think we're confident that we'll do a good job.
Great. And just lastly, what mechanisms will you use to coordinate cross-departmental working? And do you think they'll give you the leverage that you need to operate effectively across government?
Yeah, so Skills England is only going to be successful if we're able to play that highly influential role across government. Phil might want to say something in a minute about his role on the Industrial Strategy Council. What Sarah and I already do is we've worked for the last few years working across government, across the whole of Whitehall, to kind of think about issues around skills, bring colleagues together across Whitehall. We meet our peers across Whitehall regularly. And it's going to be absolutely crucial that Skills England is able to play that influential role across the government's mission, so not just across opportunity and growth, but across net zero and all these other, the green agenda and so on. So it's absolutely crucial. But I don't know if you want to say something.
Well, I mean, I would only just say that I think that, I do, as an ex-officio member of this, sit on the Industrial Strategy Advisory Council. I chair the Digital Skills Council. I'm involved with the DBT task force on technology adoption for small business. So, across the piece, we're doing things as we can. But of course, this is always about, effectiveness and output. And I think we've got to keep stressing, and I think it's not a difficult message to stress in the current limited environment, which is that we shouldn't be duplicating things. There's no point in doing that because it'll be less effective in the outcome. So if we keep focusing on the outcome, what we're actually trying to deliver for real people who need real jobs and real skills for the future, that is a much more powerful argument than, oh, this is our patch and that's your patch. And frankly, I've got no time for that, both inside and outside. You know, I think there's been too much of that kind of slightly stomping your own ground. And I think now we have to say, we've got to get the solutions here because we've got young people who are out of work, we've got people on disability who would like to have jobs that were appropriate to them, and we've got people who left the workforce after COVID, all of who are great opportunities for economic growth. But to do that, we need new solutions. We can't just say, oh, well, we've done it and it's not working. We have to fix this. And so I think with the government's policy levers and our collaboration and data lead, we've got an opportunity, I think, to genuinely do something different.
Thank you.
Serena.
Thank you, Chair. I'd suggest that this question is probably best suited for Sir David, based on your previous roles across education and your current role. So this question is about parity of esteem with the traditional academic subjects and the vocational subjects as well. So we've heard concerns that the school system do not currently prepare children to progress into technical routes of education or apprenticeships. Do you agree? And how would you ensure that children in secondary school receive the support that they need to make informed decisions post-16?
I'm conscious that the government has commissioned a curriculum and assessment review, and I know that Phil has been speaking to Professor Becky Francis, who's been leading on that, so he may wish to comment. I mean, this has been a long-standing issue, certainly for all the years that I've been in the education system, trying to ensure that there are equally valid and respected routes that meet the needs of individuals. We can't solve this problem overnight, but I think there's a really serious commitment now to try to find new ways to give people at all stages opportunities. So, for example, already we've got the introduction of the new foundation apprenticeships coming, which will be an interesting and important route. The development of T-levels, and I've seen some really great examples of schools in the northeast of England who are using T-levels to connect with industry, to provide that parity of esteem. There are also the activities undertaken by employers themselves to emphasise to young people and others the value of what they do. So I think we see it very much as our role to ensure that different kinds of qualifications are available. They're all seen as equally valid, but they always have slightly different needs. But maybe Phil might want to talk about his conversation with Professor Francis.
Yeah, I mean, I've met with Becky, and I think it's really valid. She has a shared objective with us to make this more effective. But I think it's also worth saying that that when we look at apprenticeships, which clearly have grown in esteem in recent times, there's no doubt that the people who use apprenticeships, when I used to run apprenticeships in the company I ran for many years, our apprenticeships were some of the best performing people we had, the most loyal people we had, the people who contributed more in the longer terms than many others. And we've got a big job to make sure that that kind of role is not just from us uniquely, but throughout the system, to make sure that apprentices are recognised as something of value. And that's not just with schools, but with parents as well. You know, I mean, a parent who thinks maybe a talented 16-year-old girl should definitely be a doctor or a lawyer. I have two daughters who are accountants, which probably doesn't really sound well to me, but anyway. But the reality is we need to find a way of giving people role models that are effective, ways of making the prestige different. And that is going to require some interesting thinking. And again, with the kind of data-led approach that I'd like us to take, and we will take in Skills England, which say, what are the real problems here? Is this literally a problem of visibility? People not know about it? Is it because they have a perception? In which case, messaging and communication and marketing, all that stuff that the government sometimes frowns on, is really important. We have to talk to people in a human, natural, consistent way that makes them feel, actually, this is interesting. I could get a better job doing this than I could. So we have to be holistic in that. And I think, working with others like like Becky in the curriculum review, but also other people who are in the system as well, private provision and so on, is to saying, how can this be done well? Because it is being done really well in lots of places. So.
Okay. And now I'd like to further consider apprenticeships. So one of Skills England's key functions will be to ensure that there's a comprehensive suite of apprenticeships for individuals to access and which are aligned with the skills gap that the government that the government has identified. How will you address the declining apprenticeship participation and ensure access to programmes are aligned with the identified skills gap?
Well, I'll start that off again, but I mean, I would say, to a degree, what I said before, which is that, we need to make sure that the system is holistic and easy to navigate. There's no doubt about it that the complexity, and I'm not just talking about apprenticeships, boot camps and all the other things, T levels and so on, how do they fit together? We've got to do a better job on that. And I think that, the consistency of how you define apprenticeships and maybe even some of the discussion around IFATE versus Skills England, which is that IFATE is essentially, in my terms as a business, a kind of product organisation. It's built great products and it's maintaining those great products. But it didn't really have any sales and marketing organisation or organisation to talk to people to understand, other than in the creation of the activity itself. What I see us doing is taking a much broader perspective and out there sort of working out how we can make our products and others' products, private and others, more effective in the system. That's very important. It would be crazy to have an organisation that only made products and assume people are going to buy them. It doesn't work like that in real life. You need to tell people about them and how to use them, where they fit, how they map to other things. So very much of the view that we need to get into that sort of position. I don't know whether you want to talk a little bit about some of the existing things we've already done, some of the apprenticeships and so on.
Yeah, sure. So some of the things that I think I'm proudest of in terms of the work that Skills England has been doing, sort of set-up mode, is the engagement that we've done with partners, stakeholders, businesses, to really try and get under the bonnet and understand what it is that's working well and what isn't working so well. And some of that has, I think, drawn out some themes around shorter apprenticeships, foundation apprenticeships, the alignment with those policy announcements that have been made, but also the flexibility around English and maths, and the impact that may well have on the number of apprenticeships that are taken up going forward. So green shoots in terms of numbers picking up, and in fact the latest statistics showed a 1% rise in the number of apprenticeship starts over the last period from August to January this year. So possible movement in the right direction there, but we'll keep looking at it, because obviously it's a dynamic system that needs.
Yes, and just to push on something that you referred to regarding the transfer from IFATE to the functions of the Secretary of State, the government has warned that there may be a drop in apprenticeships which will are at risk of disproportionately affecting some of our adult apprenticeships and disadvantaged learners. How could you mitigate the risks?
Well, again, starting there, I would say that our intention is to try working with the government, because the government ultimately own the policy about where they put the skills resources, but informing that as much as we can to address the areas where we see most growth, so where real jobs can be created, not just qualifications, where we can actually genuinely help people to access that system, I think is very important. And I think the of course important focus on numbers is right, but we have to be doing the right numbers in the right places, regionally as well as nationally and sectorally as well. And part of my role in the Industrial Strategy Council is to say, how do we, in those perceived growth sectors and a couple of other sectors that we're focusing on as part of the missions, which is construction, building and health and social care, how do we build the right kind of capability for that? And I think that's something that we are very focused on, to say, are we creating real jobs or real skills that will allow people to get real jobs in the future? That's my intention.
Can I just add to that? So in last October and November, Skills England carried out a series of consultation and kind of engagement with stakeholders, talked to around sort of 700 stakeholders, employers and others, to talk about these sorts of issues that you raise. And I think, and it was really interesting, and as Sarah said, really fascinating to hear kind of some of the kind of lived experience. And some of the things we heard were from employers and others were some apprenticeships are longer than they need to be. We also heard that for employers that they wanted to, in some sectors, wanted more flexibility around apprenticeships and the offer that was available via the Growth and Skills offer. We also heard from employers and others talking about the benefits of modular delivery and what could be done there. And there was also a very interesting debate, as you allude to, between how should the kind of system be geared? Should the system be geared more towards younger learners at the start of their careers, or should it be geared towards learners, adult learners, reskilling later in their working life? So a really interesting set of information and data and insight that we're going to be building on as we kind of move forward.
That's good to hear, because I too concur. I have heard that from many local employers, so thank you.
Thank you. Manuela.
Thank you, Chair. So Skills England will be responsible for ensuring that technical training, including T-levels, meets the needs of individuals and local employers. And we've heard evidence that small employers in particular face difficulties engaging with education and training structures. So how will you assist the small employers, and may I add, especially in rural areas, to participate effectively in the T-level program?
If it's specifically T-levels, but let me just slightly zoom out on it. I think small businesses generally have a real problem in engaging with systems overall. If you look at current work that's going on in Department for Business around small businesses getting access to finance, getting access to export, getting access to technology, they struggle with it all. And I've done a lot of work in this area through the Digital Skills Council, and increasingly in this role, is saying the biggest issue that they have, if you summarise it, usually there are many issues, is the complexity. The idea that when you're a small business owner who's already busy and trying to make payroll or whatever, over characteristically, is, oh my God, look at this system. It is just so complicated, I don't have time. When I ran Cisco, I had full-time people working on apprenticeships and so on. So they were the managers who were looking after it, because the complexity meant you needed people who understood the system. So I think one of the things we can definitely do is to simplify things and to give people relevance for that. We talked a little bit before about, parents and others seeing that this is a good route to getting good jobs in the right area. And as you say, in rural environments, that can be particularly challenging because they don't necessarily have access to peers who are doing it. They're not in big cities seeing lots of others. And I think one of the things in apprenticeships that I think has been successful when you see it done in a number of areas, I know David's got some experience up in the northeast, is when you've got kind of communities of people, maybe around a core industry in that case, but maybe in more rural areas it could be industries like tourism and so on, who might rally some of those together. So I think there's definitely an opportunity to create more access and relevance for people, and of course examples. People don't want to hear from me, they want to hear from businesses doing things like them who have got apprentices. Oh, and by the way, they're having weekends off now, and they're having, that's the difference you want to see, and we've got to get to that both through messaging but also through delivery, I think. So David,
if I could just say, I've recently visited Blyth Academy in Northumberland, and they've got a terrific T-level partnership with the Port of Blyth, where they are providing the sorts of skills that the port needs, which of course is really important to that part of the economy of Northumberland. But also they're working a T-levels programme with the local health system. And I think perhaps what that points to is those solutions that are created locally as people identify needs, the right partners get together, and then they make things happen, in this case for young people.
And obviously we've heard already about the relationship between employers and the program itself as well. So we have also heard evidence that employers are not as engaged in the planning and implementation of the T-level programs as they might or should be. So what measures will you take to strengthen partnerships between T-level providers and local employers?
I think there are some really useful things to point to in this space. One of them is LSIPs, so local skills improvement plans that are local plans, bringing businesses and providers together, and Skills England will have oversight of those and have the ability to look across the piece and see how they are stacking up regionally and nationally, but also to dig into the data and see whether there are patterns, trends, things that Skills England can do to help unblock, unlock, or pull people together to be able to have those conversations. I think the other thing that's really important is to also recognise that feedback from employers can help refine and improve things over time. So in the case of T-levels, we now have the flexibility for 20% of industry placements with businesses to be online. That's up to 50% in digital T-levels. So understanding that there may be refinements over time that can ease some of those issues for T-level student placements, industry placements that we know we still need to work on, but Skills England will take a keen interest in.
Now, just before I bring Jess in, so David, you mentioned the excellent work that's happening in Blythe at a local level, and we've certainly seen examples of really excellent place-based work on skills and partnerships between different parts of the education sector with employers to deliver qualifications that are needed by employers and that help local people to get into really well-paid jobs with good career progression, but relying on good and innovative work at a local level isn't a recipe for opportunity to be delivered absolutely everywhere. So can I just ask explicitly what role you envisage Skills England having in making sure that that best practice, and I as a former town planner, I think that place-based planning for skills is really important, but what we don't want to see is what we have at the moment, which are deserts where there aren't really high quality opportunities at all, and the kind of best practice happening only where there's really good local leadership for that. What role will Skills England have in that overview?
I think some of it relates to what Sarah said about the flexibilities that are now being built into T-levels, which I think will give opportunities across the country. Just to pick up that devolved point, I think that is very important because we're already seeing in combined authorities a lot of good work going on as combined authorities, mayors are working up local skills strategies, building on the work that's been done through the local skills improvement plans. And I certainly know from the North East experience that there are people starting to draw together the employers, the education providers, both schools as well as further and higher education to make that happen. So I think there will be a complementarity between the national policy changes that might make T-levels more flexible and accessible alongside the kind of local dynamics and solutions, because it may well be that in some areas there's a different mix of qualifications on offer depending on the sectoral priorities set in a combined area. So I do see this as a complementarity between the local and the national on T-levels and indeed on all aspects of skills development.
But will you have your eye explicitly on where there are deficits or deserts, either in quality or availability of provision, and will you be able to intervene to drive improvements and additional provision where that is the case?
Sorry, Phil,
I was only just going to comment and saying I completely agree with you. That is what we need to do. We need to be looking at the whole system and addressing shortcomings where they are, whether those be sectoral shortcomings or regional shortcomings. And I think there is fantastic work going on, as David described, in various areas. We know in the North West and other places been some really good work. But it's not all about that answer because, it's like anything. If you've got good leadership, you'll tend to end up with good solutions. Sometimes we have to help provide that. And so the kind of model where we could help share best practice, where we can identify cold spots or hot spots is really important. We've already talked about, how we could internally about how we could map things better and give people a sense of where things are no matter where you start from. I think that's very powerful. But I do think, and as an employer, I wanted to be able to employ people anywhere and have similar kind of capabilities. So as national delivery need to make sure that we've got the ability to give people that opportunity, but not just to say, here's some money, go and get it sorted. It's like, well, here's some examples, here's how it works, this is best practice, why don't you talk to these people, let's get you together as a combined body, as David said, and try to get them to share that practice. And it's remarkable when you do that, and you've seen many examples historically of doing that and having great effect, but it is something, you're right, we need to keep a focus on all the time.
The government has said that the new growth and skills levy will enable learners and employers to access a broader range of training offers, and that Skills England will play a crucial role in determining which training will be eligible for the levy. Could you update the committee on the progress Skills England has made on this?
Well, let me just say first of all, so I think, in the feedback we gained, there was definitely a lot of talk about it, and we know that, people were looking for more flexibility in the way they can do things. I think Sarah and Tessa mentioned already, we got a lot of feedback around things like, modularisation, using different vehicles to do that. So as part of the broader work that the government is doing on growth and skills levy, we're trying to make sure we inform as much as possible where the shortcomings are and where flexibility bound the levy would actually create some growth. I don't know whether you want to say any more, Tessa, Sarah, about the things we've done.
So the only thing I was just going to add to that is that I think since your last evidence session, we've had a bit of success with construction, which provides quite an interesting example, I think. So what's happened there is based on Skills England's analysis, the government has been able to kind of forge a kind of partnership with industry, resulting in the announcement of £600 million more investment in construction skills, developing that construction skills pipeline. And I think that's a really good early example of some of the work that Skills England can really build upon, building these kind of strategic partnerships with sectors and industry where both parties come to contribute on a plan. So it's not just focusing entirely on what can the government do via the growth and skills levy, but it's what can we do together with industry. So I think that gives us a really interesting blueprint from which to work.
And can I ask, how has Skills England engaged in its shadow capacity with the skills sector to shape its decisions on the training to be covered by the new levy?
I think going back to some of the things that Phil and Tessa have already said, the ongoing convening function that Skills England has and has had to date in bringing together key organisations, whether they're providers, industry, small SMEs, to really understand what it is that's lacking. So we've heard a lot about, I think, some apprenticeship standards, some apprenticeships may be too long, hence shorter apprenticeships in some areas, some difficult to access, hence foundation apprenticeships in some areas. But I think other things that we're hearing, and this will be a focus of work going forward, is around things like how to maximise digital skills training for not just in the digital sector but across all sectors. There was a real theme coming across from the engagement that we had over the autumn and winter, that digital skills are needed in every single sector. So, but what is it exactly that's needed to fill that gap? Is it, a very short course? Is it something that's spread out over time? And so getting into the detail of what exactly is needed will help us with that next stage of work.
And I think that's, just to finalise that, to say that is, I think, again, the opportunity for Skills England, not just to say, oh, here's a product that might address that, is to actually to be talking with people and co-creating that product, including, industry people, training providers, others who have got expertise in this. Say, this is the kind of thing that really works here. And we've heard it already. I had an example where someone was talking about a combined heat pump installer, and I think the default, we'll create an apprenticeship on that. Say, no. They just want a short course because they don't want to do that for their whole life. They want to know how to do that now and then move on to other things. So what's relevant in these environments, I think, is where we've got a real opportunity to make the best products for the best fit.
Thank you very much. Darren.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A couple of questions on funding, please. In December last year, the government announced that it was going to retain a number of the applied general qualifications that had previously been marked for defunding. That will be until 2027 and obviously included quite a lot of BTECs. Can you say what assessment you've made of the potential merits of preserving those qualifications beyond 2027 when the government's guaranteed funding?
Well, I mean, clearly there's government policy involved in that, but I don't know whether Tessa or Sarah can comment on any specific work that's been done or any input that we're trying to provide in that environment. But
I think what I would say is that what Skills England will be concerned about is ensuring that every young person has the right good pathway through their 16 to 19 journey, whether that's a T-level, an A-level, an apprenticeship or something else. And so our focus will be on making sure every young person has that access to high quality information. We mentioned earlier, and you may have come in a bit later, we mentioned earlier the work that we've been doing with the curriculum assessment review and the kind of conversations we've been having in this area, where I think our kind of views are very closely aligned. Every young person needs to have good roots. So I think it'll be something we'll be coming back to, certainly.
So it is something you're currently looking at, or you're going to approach that when it's closer to 2027?
So when Skills England will be up and running, I think we were saying at the start, should be up and running and fully functional in the next couple of months. Absolutely, one of our key focuses will be making sure that young people's pathways through, there are good pathways for young people through the system, and that they're clear and well understood, not just by learners but by employers as well.
The other question is really more general about funding of FE. At various points the committee's heard evidence that the FE sector has experienced what's quoted as a prolonged period of reduced funding, and that the government must increase spending urgently. Would you agree with that assessment that the sector is underfunded? And if so, what impact do you think that has on your ability to ensure that skills needs can still be met?
I mean, I think one of the opportunities we have with Skills England, and it's clearly an opportunity that's important, is to be working with the regional authorities to really stress the best pathways for people. And we all know historically people accessing skills through further education has been a really important pathway. But, clearly, in today's environment, we're working within a particular envelope of funding, which is difficult. But that doesn't mean that as we work with regional organisations, that we don't encourage them to put the best things, as Tessa's just said, in position to allow people to get the best qualifications or support or skills that they need. And I think that's really important. We've got to find a way of doing that. And I think working with not only the mayoral authorities but the regional authorities in general to make sure that their skill system is data rich in the sense that we've informed them what the real challenges are, how to address that best, and giving the pathways will mean that further education and other pathways, training providers and others, will be important to provide. And so I think that's where we're trying to put our focus, which is how do we rally those regional organisations together with the assets that they have in their region to be most effective in delivery. And I think that's something we need to keep stressing.
That's a fair point about obviously running the regional governments and the devolved governments and so on, but presumably you still intend to make representations to the Department for Education on why they need to ensure that the funding for this is sustainable. So can you say a little bit about what representations you intend to make or perhaps are already making?
I comment on some of that. So I think one of the things that's also worth bearing in mind is the pattern that we've seen over the last few years in a decline in employer investment in training and skills of their own employees. And so putting that together and understanding the need for co-creation of solutions, whatever the funding envelope is really important. So it's just reflecting back again on the success of the model with the construction announcement recently, where government and industry come together to form a package of support. That 600 million, over 30 million of that has come from industry to ensure that industry placements, work placements are provided. Some of the things that can be friction in the system can be best solved by industry themselves, employers. So I think it's really important to think about the resource in the system across the piece, not just what's in the education part of it or the skills provision part of it, but also what it is that industry is bringing to the table, because that's where amazing things start to happen, like this construction announcement that happened. I think it's happened since your last evidence session.
We are in a comprehensive spending review at the relatively close to the start of a new parliament, and the evidence that we have heard really clearly from the sector is that, notwithstanding the kind of very deep commitment and hard work of many, many people who work in FE and skills, they are really struggling with the underfunding of this sector historically over many, many, many years, and it is affecting their capacity to deliver, not least with the disparity in pay. And what that means for their ability to attract good people from industry to teach skills, but also on the more academic courses that are delivered within FE, the lack of parity between teacher pay in schools and teacher pay in FE colleges is causing problems for the sector. So are you really saying that you're not making any representations to the department or within the department at the moment in relation to the comprehensive spending review on a series of critical spending decisions that we're about to see that will affect the delivery of the sector to deliver your aspirations for it over the coming period? Is that the case?
Go, Tess.
So what I was going to say is I think obviously we're working really, really closely with other government departments, including the Department for Education, to prepare for that spending review. And we think that Skills England's role in helping to prepare for that spending review is very clearly articulating where the skills gaps are. And that's where we've been focusing our efforts. So our efforts are focused upon convening partners, talking to employers, talking to others, to really identify, and as we've all talked about, really understanding and getting under the skin of what the challenges are in each of the different sectors. And we're focusing our work at the moment on the industrial strategy priority sectors, plus construction and healthcare, because we think those are the sectors where skills are particularly problematic. And I think our work will be really important to the preparation, is really important in the preparation for that spending review. So that's where our focus is lying. I suppose the other thing I would say is we want to drive the best value from the system that we possibly can. All of the things that you said, we recognise and have heard others say, but what we are interested in is how can we drive best value? What can we do to remove duplication, friction for employers? What can we do to reduce inefficiency? And I think that's what we'll be focused on.
If I can just give you one last opportunity to respond maybe a little bit differently on this. So at the very beginning of our session, we asked you about operational independence and the structure within which you're set up. We have heard absolutely glaring evidence about problems with capacity and resources, and what you've told us is that your focus in terms of the comprehensive spending review is entirely on the economic growth argument, which is the government's own narrative about skills, and not particularly about the resources. Do you have the operational independence to speak about resources issues within the skills sector where that's needed? Because our evidence certainly says it really is.
I mean, I think it is, although we've said we'll focus on growth sectors, I think I also mentioned briefly in passing that we're also in Skills England, even outside the industrial strategy, focusing on health and social care and on construction stroke building. And that's for the reasons, one, we want to deliver the government's missions, but actually those are really important for the economy as well. We need to actually be providing the sorts of skills for healthcare, obviously, most importantly, and for transition into newer sectors. So I think the reality is that we want to focus on giving the right capability into the growth sectors, but we also want to provide it into sectors where it's vital for the economy to be successful, which includes building and construction, because in those environments we know that the companies who are hiring people, it's good business for them if we actually do this, and it's good that they then get engaged into the discussion here and actually get involved in forming the solutions here. So I think we will clearly focus on priority areas, including our two additional ones, but that doesn't mean what we're doing isn't reflective or beneficial to many other sectors as well. For example, in apprenticeships, if we... Sorry,
again, in really broad terms, in order to succeed in your mission, you need the whole of the FE sector to be working as effectively as it can be. There are a series of FE colleges, not absolutely everywhere, but in some parts of the country, that are absolutely on their knees because of the underfunding of this sector over a prolonged period of time. What is your view about that, and what are you saying within the department about it?
One of the most important things, it seems to me, that Skills England does is provide the evidence base for the skills requirements of the country. And I think the first Skills England report published last autumn did that compellingly. And I know there's work that's gone on since to really try to refine that picture on a sector-by-sector business. I think it is then, during the spending review, for ministers to determine what the priorities should be, both within the department and across government as a whole. But I think what we've done already is really powerful in providing that evidence. But I think the decisions, quite rightly, will fall out of the spending review.
Carolyn.
Yes, I just wanted to come back to something that you touched on, Mr. Smith, sort of earlier on, about the pathway that children take through the education system and whether they are sort of aiming for university or whether they're looking at other careers. And I wondered whether you felt that the sort of the whole sort of education system in this country has kind of moved too much in one direction, where the goal is university, and we've kind of lost sight of the attraction of other types of careers for children, and they don't go through the system thinking that could actually be a really good pathway for me, particularly if they're not so academic. So I'd just be really interested to hear your thoughts on how you think we can rebalance that, and whether you think it is necessary. And we're not going to have the skills that the country needs unless we have a strong further education system. I mean, it's quite clear that it is struggling financially, but also it needs to attract good staff. It needs to have a kudos that it doesn't have at the moment. So presumably that is part of Skills England's mission, to say that there's a whole other world out there that we're just not focusing on in this country.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, as we've said previously, we want to give people a sense of where the real jobs are and the real opportunities are. That isn't necessarily tied to individual institutions per se. I mean, because there are obviously private provision. There's apprenticeships that can be done in many environments. But I think the important thing is, as you said, is that we're actually showing young people in this particular context, what the pathways are and what is a good job to go for, and not simply saying if you don't go to university you're not going to get a job, because actually there are many people who are getting very valuable jobs in sometimes with degrees associated but sometimes without, and moving into the system. So that is important, and I think from our perspective we want to provide the data and the real focus areas to try and solve this problem. What is the issue? Is it because young people don't understand what apprenticeships are versus university? The parents don't understand what apprenticeships are? What's the data for that, and how can we show where that is nationally and regionally, and then start to address those issues and say, what can we do about that? How do we help people to get onto the right pathways that give them the right jobs?
Can I just add to that? One of the things that we've been doing recently is looking at the occupations that are particularly in demand in those sort of priority sectors. And we've tried to break down some of the kind of pathways through into those occupations, and that starts to indicate where the kind of challenges. So, for example, in some sectors you see that what we need is many more people qualified at level 2, for example, whereas in other sectors we see we need people qualified at higher education level 6 and 7 and beyond. And I think by getting, and that data we're planning to publish in due course in the coming months. But I think the challenge then, as you say, is how you communicate some of that to young people and adults, to learners in the system, and say, look, these are the pathway, this is a potential pathway through. These are the occupations that are so much in demand. How do we communicate that out to people? I think that will be a real challenge for us, working with many other, both with industry but also many other government partners, because I completely agree with you. It's a long-standing challenge, isn't it, I think, that we've had.
It involves the whole education system as well as just children and parents
right.
choosing that route.
Yes.
There has to be a route for them to go down,
exactly.
and it has to be properly funded.
Thank you. Jess?
Yes, I just wanted to ask that in light of the government's plans to support more people who may have health conditions back into work, how will Skills England be working with employers to ensure that they are both willing to take on people who may have disabilities or fluctuating health conditions, but also making sure that education providers are supported and funded to be able to best support these learners, particularly those with special educational needs and disabilities?
Yeah, again, I mean, without reinforcing it too much, I mean, I think the reality is we are trying to find the most effective pathways to work. And I, like you, share the view that we should be trying to provide that for everyone. I think that's important that we do that. I mean, clearly there's government policy involved, and already within the apprenticeship schemes there are mechanisms for bursaries for people who have got particular characteristics that they need to actually enter the system. And obviously for younger people there's money given to training providers and to people who are in particular environments themselves. So I think it's important that we do that and we make it visible that these are appropriate for people and that these opportunities are there. But one of the things again I would stress is, although there is clearly an issue with supply in some areas, there is a lot of supply around, and in many cases it's matching the demand with the supply, so giving people a view of what they can do and how they should do it, and finding an appropriate place for them. Obviously the government's decision about how they actually fund or support that, whether that be in the college or in, to the individual, is something that needs to progress. But I don't know if there's any more to say about that.
I don't think so, other than to sort of stress the importance of cross-government working in this space. So really important that we continue to join up really effectively. So with colleagues in DWP, for example, and our colleagues in the Department for Education who are working, around careers, advice and guidance, because that's really critical to getting this right and making sure the information that Skills England can provide then feeds through into the system at all levels.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming to give us your evidence this morning. We wish you well in your endeavours as you get started as a fully fledged executive agency, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And also just say we're looking forward to the report, because as the board is formed now, I'd love to be able to share the output of the report with them to get them engaged in this, because we've got a board that's ready to be announced and very excited about the opportunity as well, and it's coming from all different aspects. So more opportunities to come back again to talk to you, definitely be keen to do, and certainly keen to see the output of your deliberations. It'd be great to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome our second panel to our evidence session on further education and skills this morning. Can I just first of all put on record that one of our witnesses, Ben Rowland, has been known to me in a personal capacity for many years, because we studied together a long time ago, so it's important to put these things on the public record. And can I invite our panel to introduce yourselves to us this morning, starting with Emily Rock.
Hi, I'm Emily Rock. I'm the CEO of the Association of Apprentices. We are a not-for-profit membership organisation set up to connect apprentices in the UK for peer support and personal development. Our mission is simply to improve apprentice outcomes. We have 40,000 apprentice members and reach to a wider community of 150,000 in our partnership network, and those are partners that help us on that mission. Thank you to the committee for inviting me to speak today and to represent the apprentice voice.
Hadfield.
Thank you. I'm Jane Hadfield. I'm co-chair of the St Martin's Group, We're a membership organisation made up of employers across all sectors, awarding bodies and education providers. And we aim to focus on solution-focused advice, policy advice, critical friendship, really focusing on our breadth of experience across the board around partnerships in education, focusing on apprenticeships, but the wider skills piece as well. I'm also National Lead for Apprenticeships for the NHS, and I've worked with IFATE for many years. I'm a board member with IFATE currently, and I've led the NHS apprenticeship programme to this date. Thank you.
Katerina, Kolyva.
Good morning. I'm Katerina, Kolyva. I'm the Chief Executive of the Education and Training Foundation. We are the professional body for further education and skills. We support the professional development of all those educators and leaders that work across the system. So essentially my focus and lens for today's session is very much from the teacher perspective and all those supporting apprenticeships. And may I commend you for this inquiry on further education skills. It is a sector that drives social mobility and impact, and actually very often forgotten. So thank you for inviting us today.
Thank you. Ben Rowland.
Hello everyone, I'm Ben Rowland, the Chief Executive of AELP, the Association of Employment and Learning Providers, the membership body for organisations who deliver apprenticeships and other skills programmes with employers at the front line. Perhaps best known for our independent training provider membership, but actually we've got about 1/5 of all general FE colleges are members of AELP, similar number of universities and awarding organisations, and also a growing number of employers. It may also be of interest to the committee to know I'm the author of a guidebook on apprenticeships. Sadly, it's the only guidebook available at the moment on apprenticeships for students, and prior to that I ran a training provider for 8 years.
Thank you very much. Can I start with a nice broad question? Could you tell us your assessment of the current apprenticeship system, what's working well and what needs to be improved? I realise that is a broad question, large topic. I ask you to be as concise as possible so that we can also ask you about everything else we'd like to raise with you this morning. But perhaps starting again with Emily Rock.
I think it is a broad question. I would say, or start with that apprenticeships we know deliver return on investment for individuals, for businesses and for the economy. And I come at this from an apprentice perspective in terms of what works well here. Apprenticeships do what they say on the tin. They help close skills gaps, providing essential skills, particularly for young people to progress and adapt. And at the association, we completed a very large-scale survey at the end of last year with over 2,000 respondents. And they report gains of personal growth, of confidence, of enhanced employability. So this, for me, is evidence that apprenticeships are helping them to adapt and progress. Apprentices' view when they complete is that it also supports them with future progression, or to be ready for the future. So some of the top skills completed apprentices report are analytical thinking, flexibility, resilience, self-management and awareness. And again, these are all things that really as an individual you're armed not only in the apprenticeship to progress, but to progress beyond that. They're also great for social mobility. So 40% of those who receive free school meals who responded in our survey said that they would not be in their current industry without access to that apprenticeship. So they are providing access to opportunity, they are helping people along their learning journey, and they're helping people for the future. What may be not going so well is there's still improvements to do, because there's still a large proportion of apprentices who start their programme and leave early and who don't get to realise some of the outcomes that I've just outlined. So certainly some of the things around improving apprenticeships I'd be keen to get into as we go further in the discussion.
Thank you. Jane.
My perspective is largely from the employer perspective, and that's really the most successful piece for me is employer leadership, employer voice, co-creation. I talk about pipelines, pathways and partnerships. Education partnerships at every level is hugely important in this, and having the employer hand in hand with that triumvirate is hugely part of the success here. And one of the things that I strive to do is to remind our new colleagues is the importance of that, the trailblazing that we've done over the last 10 years and how employers have really led that way. This is a relatively young strategy, and I err on the side of be very careful about what you stop doing with regret, and really think about kind of getting into exactly where your question comes from. So I think With our St Martin's piece, we're very clear about what does work in terms of our research base. We did some research that shows that even those that don't necessarily complete, they still progress in life, in their job and in their earnings capacity. We think that quality measures in apprenticeships aren't all about completions. Actually, they're about a much broader piece around seeing success measures and life chances. With my broader piece, I think there's a really strong evidence here that we are seeing people in my own sector that are reflecting the people we're looking after. So we're really thinking about that systems approach. Some of your earlier points about place-based and systems approaches, employers working together. There is a focus on large employers. It isn't actually as easy as it seems for large employers. It's infrastructure, it's focus. That is a downfall, and it does need investment. But partnering for smaller employers and thinking about my own sector, 7,000 smaller employers in GP practices and pharmacies, they do struggle. So we really need to focus on how those pathways articulate and how we can make them much more agile and have an equality for all employers at all levels and all ages for all apprenticeships.
Katerina?
I'm sure all of us today will agree with me that apprenticeships impact on employability, on inclusion, on social mobility. So I'm sure we're all on this together. But actually the quality of apprenticeships and the quality of the experience for learners and those apprentices we all serve is down to the quality of the teacher. I use the word teacher broadly here. The tutors, the coaches, the assessors, there's so many people as part of the workforce, the wider workforce that support apprentices. They lack inconsistency in terms of the quality of that teaching and training, and that's not me saying that, it's Ofsted reports saying that, and the Department for Education saying that. And also they lack consistency in terms of parity of esteem, and you mentioned that earlier in the previous session about how academic routes versus apprenticeship routes for those who teach and support apprentices are actually not of the same esteem, the same parity. So I'll probably focus on the quality of teaching and learning, the lack of consistency and how we need to bring more consistency within the system, and the importance of parity of esteem.
Thank you. You asked the question about assessment of the system, which of course the system is all about assessment of vocational quality. I think if to assess something really well, you need to have clear learning aims, you need to have clear criteria, and you need to have clear guidance and capacity on the ground. I don't think we're yet clear on what we want from the apprenticeship system, but if you were to push me to give it a GCSE grade, I'd give it a 6 at the moment, but would be very disappointed that it wasn't, given what we've got in place, that it wasn't an 8 or a 9. Actually, the potential we've got is huge. I think where employers, where learners are using apprenticeships, as colleagues on the panel have said, they work really well. So the question is, how can we do more of that? And your question at the end to colleagues from Skills England, I think, was bang on, which is about resources, because actually the people who are going to make this happen, whether they're frontline teachers or the people who support frontline teachers, so all the quality people, the people writing curriculum, the people ensuring quality for Ofsted, making sure the money flows through and so on, it all costs money. It's all people who need to be paid well to do the task. And at the moment, the Treasury, as we know, sits on about 800 million that's raised from the levy that isn't then diverted back towards programmes. That would make a huge difference in terms of allowing organisations at the front line to not just do what they currently do, but to expand that, to go into those cold spots, to go and reach those SMEs and hold their hands to go through what is inevitably a complex system. There is no, when people talk about simplicity, it's a holy grail. There is no simple skills system because we're talking about the whole economy. But actually you need people who are equipped to hold the hands of people who are finding it difficult. And that means normally providers, whether that's a local college, a university or an independent training provider, that money would make a huge difference and would, I think, get us from a 6 to an 8 or maybe even a 9.
Thank you. Jess?
In its first report in September last year, Skills England warned there were significant skills barriers in the UK and that 36% of UK job vacancies were due to skill shortages in 2022. We hear that the government's growth plans could be seriously hampered by skills gaps in areas like construction, clean energy, digital and many others. What should Skills England prioritise in order to address these barriers and to improve the skills landscape?
wants to go first? Perhaps a good balance between focusing on learners and on teachers. I was really enthused to hear from the chair of Skills England earlier that they will focus on both, because if I pick up your example around construction, for example, Jess, what actually happens at the moment is we have set it, and government has set it as an important priority as part of this government's missions. We know that there are skills gaps in terms of getting people into construction, but there are significant areas for recruitment of those who are going to support them in terms of the teaching and the technical skills. I should probably say that all those working in education supporting apprentices are dual professionals. They are a plumber, they are an engineer, they are a nurse, they are a hairdresser, and a tutor, a coach, an assessor. And actually, in order for us to support that, we need to support that flexibility and that duality to be able to enable them to stay up to and trained at a level that makes them being always in a progression pathway and always up to date with their training.
Thank you for your question. The convener role that was discussed earlier is a great interest around our table, because it's about really understanding not just the feedback that is taken, through one lens, but actually across all of those government departments and industries. So there's something really key here about how Skills England will engage, not just with the Industrial Strategy +2, but the wider skills economy, and really understanding where are the shortages. And I think it also winds back to something else that came up earlier around information, advice and guidance, and how we're supporting not just our young people, but also the people who are in work and out of work to access agile reskilling and upskilling. Some of the apprenticeship work, you will hear all the time that employers prefer to train the people they already employ. Well, to be an apprentice, you have to be employed. So there's something about job openings and aligning them to really good technical education pathways. So I think really winding it all the way back to that excellent discussion earlier about information, advice and guidance, where this all starts, but not just focusing on one section of the community, but all learners at every stage in their lifelong learning journey.
Thank you.
I think there's a real risk for Skills England that it doesn't, that it's spread itself too thin across too many different things. And I know they've been very good at listening and engaging, but I'm looking forward to a change in gear. They need to be moving forward, driving forward, not just listening to people, not just waiting for evidence, but really pushing things forward. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think there's one apex task that they should be focused on above all others, and that's the creation of the programmes that can be used for the Skills and Growth Levy. And I think actually if they focus on that because that could become the main blockage. There are a number of my members who've got, in some cases, hundreds of young people lined up, exactly what the government wants to do, hundreds of young people lined up for industrial strategy sectors, and for example insurance, who can't start them because the programme isn't ready yet. Now that could happen, if that happens across the board, that is a bit of a disaster. That's the biggest task that Skills England should focus on. And I think also gives it the authority. We talk about where does its authority come from? Well, it comes from being able to do something that no one else can do. And that creation of those programmes is the thing that only it can do. And then it needs to buttress that, support that task, I think, by two things. One is doing what I think you were intimating they might be doing, which is pushing for more funding. And the second thing is they need to launch a very serious Marcoms campaign to get employers who like the idea of training, but it's always next month's task, not today's task, to get them properly engaged with doing more training themselves. And I think if you get that right, then young people who are already desperate for apprenticeships, the biggest blocker now for young people is not their own view that they want to go to university. Most of them don't. Lots of them are now picking university as a second choice because they can't get an apprenticeship. So we need young people we don't need to work on, but employers we need to enthuse. So those would be the three things. Focus on the programmes, make sure that they're funded properly, and make sure that people are really excited about training.
Okay, Emily.
I would only add one bit because I echo what colleagues have already said, and that is keep what works well and improve that doesn't. And no use throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Some of this stuff really works already. The other bit I'd add to it is that yes, consultation has happened, but it could be more far-reaching, and particularly could include learner voice. I think that's really important. Apprentices should be around the table, or wider learners should be around the table with employers, with training providers, with awarding organisations. Simply, they have a unique and essential perspective on what works and what doesn't around positive experiences and better outcomes. So it makes sense that they're there as well.
Thank you very much. Katerina. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to consider now the changes to the apprenticeship levy. A number of bodies have criticised the existing apprenticeship levy for training providers and employers not being able to have that flexibility. So what would a flexible apprenticeship programme actually look like in practice? And what will the proposed growth and skills levy look like to achieve this? And I'll start off with Ben, seeing that you've got a lot of experience across training providers and working with employers.
So I think the growth and skills levy should fund 3 types of programme. One is the existing set of programmes, level 2 to level 7 apprenticeships, a year plus, the idea being it's the start of a specific occupation where you are in work, you're getting high quality off the job training, and your employer, crucially, this is the crucial bit, is blending those 2 things together. It's taking a very active role in making sure that your theoretical learning is being applied in the workplace. That's sort of product 1. Product 2 is foundation apprenticeships, which should be aimed, not exclusively, but aimed at young people who don't know where to start, but are deployed in the sectors which have been the traditional stepping in points to the world of work for many people, including myself, which is retail, hospitality, some of the care professions, office administration and junior construction roles. By the way, it is absolutely crazy that the government is not proposing to use foundation apprenticeships for hospitality, where they could get tens of thousands of young people supported in their first job. And it's also crazy that they're taking foundation apprenticeships to the industrial strategy sectors who don't really have a need for them. So that's the second type, foundation apprenticeships. And then the third type, where people are sort of groping through the fog for it, but I think it will emerge soon, is these shorter programmes, which are mainly aimed at people already in the workforce, who at the moment only have the option of using a 12-month plus full-fat apprenticeship to get maybe 3 months' worth of training that they actually want. So lots of people on some of the management training or the digital training, or indeed some of we were talking about plumbers, heat pump engineers, they need 3 months or so to upskill. Still in the same construct, in a job, learning off the job, and with their employer showing how they deploy that in practice. So it's not going off to some college or some online training for 5 nights, and getting a little certificate. It is genuinely about doing the job, but just in much shorter forms than is currently available. I think if you have those 3 things, talking to industry bodies, as I do a lot, to employers directly, and to training providers, I think there's a growing sense that actually those 3 things between them would provide the kind of flexibility that people want, but without opening the system up to every possible organisation who could come in and sell, whatever shiny course they've got. Actually, the benefit of keeping in those 3 products is that the same systems that apply for apprenticeships would work as well in terms of Ofsted, financial assurance, Skills England setting the programmes. There's no need to recreate a parallel system to make sure the quality stays the same.
You talked about flexibility, so agree with Ben on the shorter courses, but also training the trainer, retraining people later in life, so a lot more flexibility more broadly. And I suppose we would advocate at ETF that we would like the levy to focus on 2 areas, both on learners and their progression, but also tutors and the workforce that supports the learners, and we don't have that at the moment, so there's something about enhancing that workforce to use the levy to train the trainer. I should probably also say that at ETF, as part of our register, we have 23,000 practitioners on it, and a large part of them will have gone through a process of a professional status, the so-called qualified teaching and learning skills, which is actually linked to the DFE register and now has parity of esteem with schools, which is a great achievement of, if you know QTS, QTLS now has that equivalent. It doesn't really apply to apprenticeships, so we are working at the moment around how do we make sure that with the levy and the wider policy framework we can create a status that is only for those who work and support apprentices. So there's definitely more to do in that space.
Okay, thank you. And Jane?
Yes, everything colleagues have said, but I would also add around focus on employer requirements and really think about how that crosses over into those wider strategies, not just industrial, as Ben has said, but also we need to think about protecting apprenticeships in this as well. And I would strongly advocate that training should be designed around the pathways that lead to occupational competence. So I'm all for modular, but what's the end result? Can I walk away? I'm a bit old-fashioned around skills escalators here, step on, step off, lifelong learning. Really think about not just where we are now, but where someone is leading. Because what we really see with apprenticeships and work-based learning and vocational training is people stay. You know, they stay with their employer, they work across the sector, and they develop really fruitful careers across that. So we don't want repetitive, duplicative training where they've got to redo stuff if they want to go and train to be something else in the sector.
Okay, thank you. And Emily?
I would agree with that. I think certainly when we hear from employers all the time the flexibility is needed, but also from learners, apprenticeships aren't the right solution for everybody, and they could provide, depending on the solution, really great ramps on or really great ramps off to apprenticeships, which helps with progression. And you're absolutely right, apprentices in particular want to know what the long-term game is, what is the career path. So if we can somehow make those other flexibilities make sense to them, I think that's a good thing. I think there is a slight danger of confusion at the moment, certainly around things that have been announced. Shorter apprenticeships because there's different content, shorter apprenticeships because of duration, foundation apprenticeships, level 2 entry. We're kind of crowding the market here without it making sense to people coming into the system. So we just need to be really, I suppose, clear around what the flexibilities are, how it all works together.
Okay then, thank you.
Caroline?
Thank you. We have touched on this a little bit in your answers to the previous question, but so the government has talked about introducing shorter apprentices and new foundation apprentices. So if there's just anything you'd like to add on what measures you think Skills England and the government need to take to ensure the success of these initiatives?
Ben, want to go? Can I just... I'm just building on something that Emily mentioned there, crowding this entry-level market. And I'm working with employers in some of this space now and giving advice around that. We're going to launch Shorter, and there is great support for Shorter for learners that can achieve within that space of time. But I'd really like to see that these programs are learner-centred and it's based on that learner progression. So we don't close a door, but we open other doors for those that are able to progress. There's also something about the foundation apprenticeship, how long that's going to take and what does it lead to? What's the progression pathway? So these are the questions that Emily's mentioned there around. That's the clarity we need. I have concerns that they're looking at starting these things all at the same time. And again, the employer feedback is, and the discussions we've had and the advice we've been giving, is make it really clear now about what these are. Are they ramp on, ramp off? And where do they lead? And remember I said about occupational competence. We need employers and sectors and service users that are confident in the people that are doing this training, that are meeting occupational competence. So, you know, if you're going to do a foundation apprenticeship, how does that then dovetail in with your next apprenticeship? And do we end up then seeing exactly what I just mentioned, duplication of effort, because you might as well have gone straight into that level 2 shorter apprenticeship, perhaps. So there's just something about how all of that comes together, and we need that clarity.
I completely agree on the clarity. I think the shorter duration has, in that sort of list of 3 types of programs, shorter duration is sort of a footnote to the second type, which is the main apprenticeships, and somehow it's become the leading change, and has got a bit confused. There are lots of reasons why an apprenticeship less than 12 months might be useful, but actually the starting point should be, you know, the concept is a year, and that seems to work really well. Where someone is flying through it, we don't want to hold them back. Where someone's already been in the job for 10 years and just has never had formal training, we want them to be able to do it quicker. But those are sort of amendments to the main product. I think there's a really important technical issue, which is around 8 months. So the government's proposing to change the legislation for the minimum length of an apprenticeship from 12 months to 8 months. And they're also saying, aha, that means we can do foundation apprenticeships for 8 months as well. They're trying to sort of be efficient and smart about that legislative change. But people who want foundation apprenticeships, which are hospitality, retail, those sorts of, they only want a 6-month programme. And that would really keep it really clear. If you said 6-month programmes in those sectors, which are the traditional entry points for the world of work, those employers would go, get it, got that. We don't need to worry ourselves about, the slightly shorter apprenticeships over here. And then the people who are doing the shorter apprenticeships wouldn't need to worry about these ones. So actually you could get all of those things up and running if you focus them where they are needed, on the sectors that they're needed.
Thank you.
Perhaps what these examples are actually demonstrating is how different leadership skills are required to lead apprenticeships than any other part of education in further education and skills. Those leadership skills that are about systems thinking, that you need to look across the industry, work-based learning and education, managing compliance, navigating employer relationships. It's a much more complex leadership development. I mean, we run leadership development at ATF, and we know and talked to Ben already about how complex it is in the apprenticeship arena rather than any other part of the system.
Well, thank you, Chair. So there has been a sharp fall in apprenticeships, starts since 2017, when a new funding system was introduced, and we know that there were 150,000 fewer apprentices starting their training in 2023 than in 2016. So we have heard that this is due to low pay, but also to a lack of information in schools regarding the clear route to apprenticeships, as opposed to ready information, for example, available for routes into higher education or A levels. So what steps should the government take to address these issues? And I would like to start with Emily.
In terms of declining participation, actually we are starting to see starts move in the right direction, but you're absolutely right, information at school is not where it needs to be quite yet, and we heard from some apprentices really recently actually about careers advisors feeling ill-equipped to brief students, and at the right time in the academic cycle. Sometimes the apprenticeship information is coming too late after the UCAS deadline, and the student is feeling a bit lost about where to go. And actually some personal experience of my daughter, who was sat in a careers session, and out of 30 students in a class, when the careers advisor asked who wants to go to uni, only 2 put their hands up, and actually she was like, this is the 3rd presentation I've done, and the same answer. So it's like young people have this, parents starting to get it as well, but actually careers advisors and teachers to support that information would be good to do. And there's also something around role modelling success. A lot of students don't really understand what a data scientist is or what a production operative is. So if we talk about pathways and what happens at the end and entry to those pathways, that would help those young people to understand what routes to go into.
Absolutely, couldn't say it better really. It's about the pathways. I mentioned information, advice and guidance. It is at every level. I think, there are pockets where I still hear, I work with a college and a school as a governor, and there is some sort of groups of parents that still think apprenticeships are YTS programs and that kind of thing, but that's their lived experience. So we really need to do the role modelling and much better marketing. We work with some amazing apprentices who are the best ambassadors for their programs, and we can't do enough support for employers to release people to go in and talk to schools and colleges and young people's organisations, because that again, sharing that lived experience is something that we really need to focus on. But there's an additional cost and infrastructure for employers to be able to do that. We need to kind of demonstrate the return on investment for employers to do these things. It's part of the holistic approach, really. You have to start at the beginning of the pipeline and join it wherever you can. And that visioning about, so where is this progression pathway taking me? And allowing that aspiration to be built in. It's one of the things I mentioned earlier. We talk a lot around all ages, all levels. We've talked about some levels issues here already. There's some proposals around changing how we fund it, but actually we need to keep the aspiration of the art of the possible within the technical and vocational pathways, whether they be apprenticeships or other kinds of programs.
It's definitely about parity in status, and as a culture, and the average member of the public, would we all say, I would value further education skills more than other parts of education? I understand what it is, I understand what further education skills is, I know exactly what is the pathway for my children, for example, whereas we know the university narrative, we know there is UCAS, we know there's a system, we know when our children are at school, they're told all those. So we need to almost recreate that, and we also need to talk the further education skills sector up. I don't think we do that enough, and we all have a responsibility for us, as individual members of the public, you yourselves in your roles as members of parliament. I think you have a role in talking the sector up, and which is why I mentioned earlier about the importance of the quality in the system, because the more we bring the quality up, the better the impact we can demonstrate.
So I think it's worth spending a bit of time understanding why the numbers dipped. And I was delivering apprenticeships at the time of the change when it moved from frameworks to standards. And I think we have to recognise that apprenticeships got a lot harder to do and to deliver. They got better. One of the problems before, people always talked about how frameworks could be a bit patchy quality-wise, because you just had to go through and once you ticked every box, you might have forgotten what you'd done 12 months ago, but as long as the box had been ticked 12 months ago, you got it. Whereas there was now endpoint assessment. It became much harder. There was a change, so employers were getting used to it, and so the numbers dropped. And then, of course, COVID hit, so the numbers never had a chance to kind of come back up. And we've fallen into a set of habits as a country about how we go about using our apprenticeship levy, typically on people who we've already got employed, so there's not the risk of taking on someone who's unknown. The programmes have got higher end. We like that, and that's a good thing, but they tend to be more expensive, leaving less money behind. But we've also got to recognise, and as I say, I absolutely live this. I ran sales teams who are, by the way, the unsung heroes of the apprenticeship system, who actually go out and knock on doors and encourage employers to do to take this on board. It's just much easier for any provider, be that a university or a college or an independent training provider, to go out to a big employer, a big engineering firm, a Citibank, and persuade them to put 50 people on an apprenticeship programme than it is to go around 50 SMEs, all of whom might change their mind at the last minute, and persuade them to take on an apprentice. So what we need to do is to address that full on, and the way to do that is with incentives and behaviours. We all respond to incentives and behaviours, and we need to make sure that it's worth the while of our limited time, if you're someone who provides these courses, to go and spend time with SMEs who are traditionally much better at employing young people as well. So those incentives are a very good use of some of that £800 million I was talking about earlier.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Some of the written evidence that we've seen in the committee describes the apprenticeship system as overly complex and rigid. I think we've begun to touch on this just now, but what, in your view, are the ways of making sure that taking on and training an apprenticeship, that whole process is improved for employers? What's your perspective on that? Don't mind who goes first.
I can start with a bit on that. So I think duration is really important for people, that actually there's a sense of choice. Giving people a sense of choice, I think, gives people a sense of agency in all of this, and I think duration is one of them. I think one of the other key things that Skills England needs to bring into this is a small amount of optionality in apprenticeship programmes. So at the moment, to pass an apprenticeship, to become qualified as an apprentice, you need to demonstrate that you can pass 100%, you can show 100% of the knowledge, skills and behaviours, which means it's absolutely all or nothing. And actually some people, some of that what's in the programme won't be as relevant for them as it might be for other employers. Which again, if you just added a little bit of optionality into that would again give people a much greater sense. It would be more accurate for their needs, but it would give them a sense of agency and ownership. The other thing that, this is slightly behind the scenes, but some of the standards, and Jane know this better than me from her work within IFATE, but some of the standards get delayed because two people disagree over some, really arcane point because it has to be 100%. Any disagreement stops the whole thing. Whereas if you just say, well, actually, if 10% could be optional, one person could say, well, I'm going to die in a ditch on making sure this is included. You say, well, you can have that. And someone else could say, well, I definitely don't want that in. And you could say, well, you can have that. So the whole system would move much more easily if we could build that in. Some of the other things that people don't like, they talk about lack of flexibility, are really just, it's not quite working. It's not quite doing what I want. But some of the things, the bureaucratic layers in there are there to protect taxpayers' funding, and it's okay that they're in there. And most people, to be honest, I think accept that there are some bureaucratic rules that come with government funding.
If I were to say one thing, it would be let's ensure we have consistency in the quality of the teaching and the quality of the experience that apprentices receive at the end. And in order to do that, I wouldn't advocate for mandation or further regulation. We've got enough of that in the system. My organisation was our predecessor was the regulator, actually, for teachers and tutors back in under New Labour. So we know, and we've learned the lessons from that process. Actually, what we are advocating for is a national, and we've put it in our evidence, is a national framework, a kite mark, if you like, that demonstrates, showcases best practice and says, this is what good teaching and learning looks like for apprentices. And let's demonstrate that, use case studies and have that at national level so that people can draw up to that standard rather than having that inconsistent quality that we're experiencing at the moment.
Functional skills policy is going to be interesting to see. Taking away the requirement of achieving your functional skills by gateway is potentially very empowering. It's been a bit rocky about how it was announced, and frankly, from an employer point of view, confusion. But we have to have the confidence that will settle. I think we have to have messages that functional skills, and that's numeracy, literacy, and digital skills, are really valued and still really important. They're valued by employers, so many of the apprentices will still require that. But I have had experience where functional skills has been both a blocker to progression onto an apprenticeship because of the education requirement, the educator provider requirement, and also people don't complete because they can't achieve their functional skills at gateway. So they're occupationally competent, all bar their maths and English. So I think really pursuing that policy and embedding it well, and aligning it and attuning it to what this country wants around numeracy, literacy, and digital skills, not using an apprenticeship standard as a Trojan horse to achieve what we need in those sectors, but really kind of aligning and sorting that out. So we need to really see how that beds in and look at that, because it's cited by employers as one of the major issues for not recruiting talent and people not completing.
A couple of points that I would add in terms of getting employers engaged and the flexibility that they need. I think SMEs in particular, if we see them as key to unlocking provision, certainly for the many students who are applying to oversubscribed programmes and not able to get onto them, they need a bit more enhanced, a bit more targeted support. And that's not necessarily financial, although that's helpful to helping hire and manage apprentices. Some of that may be down to communication. And in particular, apprentices report that their employers do not understand the commitment. So yes, there is bureaucracy in apprenticeships that has to be there, quite rightly, as you've said, Ben, for taxpayers' purposes. But actually, the employer sometimes goes into this not understanding, and that then manifests in a poor experience for the apprentice. So I think targeted support for SMEs, understanding commitments. And then there is some flexibility still that could be offered up to make things easier. And it doesn't necessarily have to be big policy changes, but just if you look at some of the challenges, apprentices in particular report around balancing work and life, around time management, there are things within apprenticeship programmes that we might be able to flex to support that.
Thank you. And thinking about once you've got apprentices in place, actually last academic year, 23-24, there was a over 38% dropout rate before they finished their training. So what are the specific interventions that you think would be most effective in trying to tackle that dropout rate?
I was going to say it has improved. The latest achievement rates have gone up to 60% from the year before, but as you say, there's more to do, and there's lots of reasons why apprentices leave their programmes, but a major one is simply lack of support. In our own survey last year, balancing work and study time management, completing and recording off-the-job training, admin-related type activities were the main stressors, as well as preparing for endpoint assessment, understanding what's required. In fact, 62% of the people that responded to the survey told us that they felt stressed or anxious because of their apprenticeship. And when you look behind the scenes at some of the data, if you're over the age of 25, if you're on a higher level of apprenticeship, if you're approaching EPA, in fact, if you have learning difficulties or disabilities, you're more likely to feel stressed than any other groups. So I think there are certain groups that you need to look behind the data. It's not a blanket approach to fixing this, and understand what are the best interventions for them. However, it all leads to and highlights the importance for support systems and resources to help apprentices manage those workloads and to reduce stress. One way is managing expectations up front, so being really clear with school students coming into apprenticeships, what is it that you're going to get into, and painting that picture of the clear progression pathway so they understand the value at the end. But the other is integrating support systems, so integrating the financial assistance that's available for apprentices, the mental health support that's available for apprentices, the peer group through organisations like the association that's available for apprentices. Some of the resources already exist out there to support some of these things, and it's just about making people aware and integrating. I, for one, would love to see it mandated as part of an apprenticeship that every apprentice joins a membership organisation like the association, because we know that peer group support and life skills development that we offer is essential for apprentice success and improving outcomes.
Can I just say at this point, I need to wind up this session by about 10 to 12 to allow members to get to Prime Minister's questions, and we've got a couple of further areas that we really want to take your evidence on, so if I can just encourage you to be succinct with the remaining answers, that would be really helpful to us. Sorry, Dan.
I would just say one thing, the lack of a workforce strategy. We don't have a national workforce strategy for further education and skills. Other sectors do, NHS, long-term plan, schools, we don't have one. So there is the very, very important point that we've made in our evidence. We haven't had one for a decade. So a national workforce strategy to support apprentices and support everybody who wishes to go through further education skills.
I think two things I'd say. One is we need to really understand what dropout means, because it's not, what it means is someone starts an apprenticeship and doesn't complete their apprenticeship. Actually, it could be because they've got promoted and therefore leave the apprenticeship because they don't need it anymore. That's quite common. People might move and the new employer might not want to carry it on. It's not always a failure when someone doesn't complete their apprenticeship. So we need a more intelligent way of doing that. And AELP is running a mini commission looking at exactly at this point is how do we actually measure success of these programs. But I think it's also really important that there are some people where the completion rate is in the 80s and 90s, and there are others where it's 50% or less. Sometimes that's industry. In some industries, the turnover of the workforce is that. So actually, in cases where apprenticeship completion rates outstrip the natural churn, suggests that that's the apprenticeship working, even though it looks like quite a low number. So we need to just be a bit more, I think, smarter, as it were, about interpreting that number.
And is that what your commission is going to...
Yeah.
Okay, we'll look at it.
Thank you.
What he said, I mentioned functional skills. There is some, we're going to look at endpoint assessment with Skills England, so I think that needs to be a slicker, smoother process. And absolutely that piece on progression. Actually, St Martin's Group also did some research that clearly demonstrated that people don't necessarily fail because they don't complete, they progress. So we can share that with you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. There's no requirement to repeat any part of your previous answers because we've touched on this before. The government has said that removing the mandatory requirement to do maths and English for adult apprentices is going to boost skills, cut red tape and support employers. What is your assessment of this policy? We'll start with Emily and work down.
Very brief. I think it gives employers flexibility to decide with learners whether it's the right route for them, and I think that's a good thing. Many employers I speak to are saying they're going to do it anyway, which makes me think that they value those skills. If you ask apprentices, though, it's a really mixed response. Some think it will help them. Some report that whilst maths and English is crucial for their job and they enjoyed doing it, some of it was unnecessary. There's some feeling that it might weaken essential and transferable skills needed across the UK. So there's a real mix from apprentices and some unintended consequences about the discrepancy in age groups. So what applies to 16 to 18, what is 19 plus? Will that discourage people from applying until they're age 19 or employers from taking apprentices until they're 19? So some unintended consequences that we may need to watch out for.
Okay, understood.
What she said, I said a bit before as well.
Yes,
and there is a point about equality here. I think all learners should be treated the same if it's an occupational requirement. And again, from an employer point of view, I'm hearing employers do actually value functional skills because it's their core skills within the workforce.
Understood.
I would say getting the balance right. It's important to reduce barriers, but equally important to ensure that we have those foundational skills that are required for employability. So I would refer also to ESOL learners, those who have English are not their first language, for example. I would also refer to NEETs, those not in education or employment or training. So how could they be disadvantaged here in terms of their employability? So I'd say perhaps a more balanced approach.
Understood.
I'm massively in favour of the change and campaigned very hard for it. And in fact, our first mini-commission was looking at the evidence for it. And the main reason is, it for many people, it was a complete nightmare. And that's both for the learner, their line manager, the people trying to teach them, because you're taking someone who's failed for 11 years at English and Maths, been told they're a failure, and then you're saying, actually, you know that thing that you were a terrible failure at, and now you're succeeding in a vocational... No, sorry, you've got to come back to that. We're going to drag you back to that. And that meant that actually what happened is people logically made a very sensible choice, which is to say, well, if you're an employer, I'm going to take on someone who's already got the English and Maths skills, so I don't have to inflict that nightmare on someone. If you're a young person who hasn't got the English and Maths already, you say, I'm going to take a different route, because I don't want that. I've heard it's a nightmare. So it basically ended up, it was supposed to be an exit requirement, i.e. you couldn't complete until you'd done it. It became an entry requirement. So we did 2 snapshots, one in September, one in January of this year, and it was respectively 75% and 84% of apprenticeship vacancies at that time required you to already have English and Maths at the required level. So they were using it to screen people out. So the very people who you wanted to get into the system and give them purpose, a sense of progression, were being blocked out of it. So for that reason and that reason alone, I think it's a brilliant change. I think there are some important things that we need to get right, but the most important is that it should be embedded into the standards. So I went down to see a provider in Devon, I think other side of Devon from you, but who taught, they were teaching people, kids who didn't have English, Maths GCSE, trigonometry. They had no idea they were even doing maths. They thought they were learning how to know how much wood to take off a bit of timber so the roof didn't collapse. So that's the way in which we should be teaching maths, and probably also as well financial skills, because everyone cares about financial skills.
So a former maths teacher always brings joy to my heart. Explaining how to teach. Always. With time so short, I'm going to skip to my last question. So we already touched on it. I think Emily mentioned it. With the removal of maths and English as a requirement, of course, employers can choose to still teach it. Is there a chance that we're now going to see employers gravitate towards employing people or putting people onto apprenticeship courses that are over the age of 19 at the expense of those aged between 16 to 18?
I said earlier, possibly. And certainly that's some of the fears that apprentices speak to us about as well. So it's possible.
I haven't heard that. What I have heard from a health perspective is that we value core skills and we want it embedded in the occupational standard, but we welcome the fact that it's going to stop blocking people getting through gateway. So
okay, understood.
I was looking at ONS stats. 13.4% of 16 to 24 year olds not in employment, education or training, up 110,000 from 2023 to 2024. So I think there's compelling evidence here to ensure that we focus on level 2 to level 5.
I think it will make a difference at the margins, and I know this because I've lived, if someone is 18, doesn't have their English and Maths, and they turn 19 next month, if I'm their apprenticeship training provider, I'm going to recommend for everyone's sanity that they wait a month before they start.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Finally, Jess.
The government has said that the growth and skills levy will not fund all apprenticeships and that businesses must fund more of their level 7 apprenticeships. What impact will the decision to remove level 7 apprenticeships from the levy funding have on the system and potentially on social mobility within the workplace? Ben, I don't know, and you've said that the 800 million that's been top sliced could help to...
it's about 300 million or so that's spent on level 7 apprenticeships, and lots of that goes on for people who if you looked at them, you would say, no, we want them to be funded. So people working in the NHS, young people, exactly as you say, getting into solicitor roles, getting into accountancy practice, who would not have otherwise been able to do that. And so I think it's unnecessary. And I think the way in which they've done it as well is... well, they haven't announced it yet because we think we've slowed them down. But if they want to save money, then they're going to have to plan it over a long period of time because these apprenticeships are quite long. And they need to do it in a step-down way to give employers several years to increasingly get used to perhaps putting more of their own money in. At the moment, this proposal to put it as a cliff edge is, I mean, employers are upset enough at some of the changes that the government's brought about in terms of NICs and upcoming employment legislation. So to suddenly pull the rug away with no time to adjust just doesn't look like it's very business savvy at all. So they need to put it on a taper down to give them the time to say to the employers, look, you value these programmes, now you can lean into them, but they need to do it over time.
Exactly. I think, thank you, there is a risk that also you deter young people from taking on an apprenticeship, and there's a couple of examples I have where somebody at 16 was encouraged to do a level 3 apprenticeship because she could see the end game was a level 7. And actually, if you're sat at school and thinking that level 7 might not be there, would you take that level 2, level 3 entry apprenticeship that the department is trying to do more of? And you've got people currently in the system who are also worried about their progression being capped. So I spoke to a level 3 paralegal apprentice who has finished her apprenticeship but is now worried she won't be able to go on and do her level 7. Will that make that young person think actually the apprenticeship route isn't for me and actually another route? So I think there is a risk, not just employers, but I think it might deter young people.
I think there's a greater loss that doesn't get spoken about in that the apprenticeship model gives us a quality education model set against national occupational standards designed by employers. And I have grave concerns that actually if employers are going to have to pay for something at level 7, they won't choose an apprenticeship. We'll go back to modular masters or self-funding or, a mixed economy. And as you know, from the health sector, it has had already real fears around some very innovative training programs. And again, back to my earlier point, picking up on Emily's as well, that long-term career aspiration, just the bare fact that it's a possibility has made a really big difference to the parity of esteem. And I also have concerned about thin end of the wedge stuff. Let's not too fine a point on it. Our degree apprenticeships secure. We really value them. We really want to keep them. But what happens next? All ages, all levels is really our strong message.
I don't think it's either or. It's about prioritisation. I made the point earlier about NEET and young people and making individuals economically active, but actually you do need level 7 for a leadership pipeline and all those progression points my colleagues made. So I think it's, again, back to balance in terms of, yes, focus, but let's not remove all of it. Agree with you, Ben. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for giving us your evidence this morning. It's been extremely useful to us. What I'd say is that if there was anything that you felt there wasn't the time to cover adequately that you would like to write to the committee about after this meeting, please feel free to do that, and we'd certainly welcome it. And we will feed your evidence into our report, which should be published in due course. Order. That brings our evidence session for today to a conclusion. Thank you.